Warhammer Fantasy is a world known for its powerful characters and races. When confronted with the never-ending horrors that are chaos, what choice does one have but to grow strong or perish? From the frozen chaos wastes far to the north of the Old World, to the dense jungles of Lustria, to the barren deserts of Khemri, Warhammer is teeming with warriors imbued with the strength of gods, who can split mountains with the power of their strikes, or tumble empires with a single stroke of their sword. But in the echelons of legendary fighters that inhabit the Warhammer universe, there are a handful who stand apart from the rest. These are the top 5 melee fighters in Warhammer Fantasy. Videos like this are always open to interpretation. There will always be arguments to be made for this character or that character or who is stronger. And much of it is hypothetical, but based on the wonderful lore set in front of us by the Black Library and Games Workshop, we can create a pretty well-informed video that will hopefully get people debating and, more importantly, learning about the Warhammer universe. A universe that, if you're watching this video, will become even more important to you when you get your hands on Total War Warhammer on May 24th. For this video, we're taking a few things into consideration and setting some ground rules first. This is about the top 5 melee fighters in Warhammer Fantasy, which means no casting or actively manipulating the winds of magic in any way. Certainly this list would look very different with incredibly powerful casters like Vlad von Karstein, Lord Kroq, or Teclis of the High Elves blasting entire armies away, but there's something less alien and certainly more manly about wading into combat and slaughtering hundreds in a pure test of martial skill, brute strength, or deadly finesse. Mounts, as I'm sure most of you are aware, are an important part of Warhammer Fantasy and can greatly impact the course of battle in the tabletop and in the lore. Creatures like Grimlock the Carnosaur, Deathclaw the Imperial Griffin, or Dorgar the Steed of the Apocalypse are incredibly powerful in their own right, yet add another confounding variable into the equation that frankly has nothing to do with the melee capabilities of the fighters themselves. And it's for that reason that mounts will not be taken into consideration for this video. Magic weapons, on the other hand, are an integral part of a character's melee capabilities. You'd be hard-pressed to find many Warhammer heroes that wield a weapon that isn't blessed or gifted by some god or covered in runes and magic. They will be counted for the purposes of this video. Now, the end times are a hotly debated topic, and although they certainly did introduce some interesting characters and fantastic tabletop models, they're pretty much universally scorned as GW's attempt to destroy the world of Warhammer Fantasy. What isn't really up for debate is that there are a lot of lore retconning and power level manipulation shenanigans going on when you start considering the 8 incarnates of magic. For those who don't know, the winds of each lore of magic bound themselves to certain Warhammer characters during the end times, dramatically increasing the fighting prowess and killing potential of each of these heroes. This makes things really confusing and frankly silly, so it will please many of you to know we won't really consider end times in determining the best fighters in Warhammer. We will still be sharing certain stories from the end times though, as not all of the fluff written for it was terrible. So what are we left with? The 5 fighters in Warhammer Fantasy with the purest martial skill, the strongest brute strength, and the will and ability to put other legendary warriors into an early grave. Let's get this countdown started. Number 5. Abhorash the Blood Dragon. Blood Dragons are the absolute pinnacle of vampire martial prowess, unmatched warriors in a world consumed by war, and Abhorash was the first. His story is one that began thousands of years ago in the ancient days of Nehekhara, at the peak of that kingdom's power. He was the captain of Neferata's bodyguard, a loyal man whose skill with the blade was unmatched even in those days. Neferata had discovered necromancy in the books of Nagash, and created an elixir that turned her into the first vampire. She quickly turned her entire court to vampirism, but Abhorash would not turn willingly, and was tricked into drinking the potion. At first he fought his newfound desire for blood, but even the strongest willed cannot ignore the curse of the vampire for long, and in one night of gore, he succumbed, and slaughtered 12 of Neferata's subjects. Now normally, this is where you roll your eyes and say, yeah, vampires are dicks, what else is new? But Abhorash is interesting because unlike the majority of vampires in Warhammer, he isn't a caricature of evil. He actually has quite a lot of noble qualities. When you look at Manfred von Karstein and Neferata, and certainly characters like Wallach Harkin or Conrad von Karstein, they're pretty cut and dry evil, but Abhorash is different. After sullying his purity in that one night of murder, he chose to only slake his thirst on the criminals and evildoers in his city, and burned 12 candles every night for the victims he had slain. Soon, the people of Lamia grew tired of their vampire overlords and revolted, overthrowing the kingdom. The vampire court fled to Nagashizar, the fortress city of Nagash, but Abhorash set out on his own journey with 4 of his warriors and taught them that single combat and honor in battle were the only true measures of greatness, and that only the impure fed upon the weak. Abhorash refused to feed upon weak individuals and would only slake his thirst on great champions he encountered. Throughout his travels, he killed countless orc warlords, human tribal leaders, champions of chaos, and other great fighters, but none could match him in combat. Eventually, he came upon the lair of a massive red dragon, perhaps one of the only creatures on the planet with the potential to best him in 1v1 combat. They fought for an entire night, but finally, Abhorash plunged his sword deep into the creature's heart, and as the lifeblood of the immense beast spilled out, he drank deeply. For hours he gorged himself, but when he finally left the dragon's cavern, he no longer thirsted for blood. Scattering his warriors to the 4 winds, he told them to seek out the most dangerous foes and defeat them in single combat, so that they could one day cure themselves from the thirst as he had. Many of these characters you know: Wallach Harkin, the Grand Master of the Knights of Blood Keep, Varison the Blade, and the Red Duke, the Mad Blood Dragon Musillon. But after that, he passed into myth and legend, and wasn't seen again until the end of all things, when he and the Green Knight held off endless hordes of Skaven until the world was consumed by chaos. Now Josh Reynolds, a writer of numerous 40k and Warhammer Fantasy novels, called Abhorash the greatest warrior the world had ever seen, as close to a 2-legged engine of destruction as the old world gets. A creature who's done nothing but fight for over 1,000 years, no rest, no sleep, no holiday, just war. But even the great Vlad von Karstein would know better than to fight him, and if he did, he'd wake up later after his ring had resurrected him, and would wonder why he'd done it. So why isn't Abhorash ranked higher than number 5? To be clear, even being considered for this list with a bunch of melee gods and immortals is a huge honor, but if he's considered by a Warhammer author as the greatest warrior to ever live, why isn't he number 1? Well, honestly, we probably could put him there, but what it comes down to is simple. We don't know enough about him, and didn't see his character enough in the lore to mark him as the greatest fighter in Warhammer history. His list of accomplishments isn't as long or impressive compared to some of these other characters, and he never tested himself against most of the named characters of this age. The only time he shows himself is during the end times. Still, there is a high probability that if he showed his face more than once during the lore spanning the tabletop game, he would probably be higher on this list, probably at number 2 or number 1. Blood of the Dragon, the greatest vampire in history. Animal.
Hello there, I'm Lord Master of Sotek, and I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with number 4 on our list. Of the many races covering the Warhammer world, one of the oldest are the cold-blooded lizardmen found mainly in Lustria. These children of the Old Ones have stood as guardians of the world for well over 10,000 years, having led genocidal wars against forgotten races long before chaos even came to the world. The main warriors of the lizardmen are a subspecies known as the Saurus, bipedal 8 to 10 feet tall lizards covered in iron-hard scales that were designed for battle. These saurians are horrifically strong, ripped with taunt muscles and covered in dangerous spikes and claws. Their jaws are particularly famous for being able to shear through metal with a nasty habit of locking shut, meaning once they latch on, those rending teeth are keeping anything they chomp down on. More importantly, however, Saurus cannot die of old age in the Warhammer world. As time passes, they only grow stronger, faster, and tougher. Their scales will continue to layer as decades turn into centuries, protecting them with a natural defense that rivals the famous Gromrel armor of the dwarves. It is also worth noting that when Saurus emerge from their spawning pools, They do so fully grown and knowing every battle tactic, strategy, and combat style to perfection used by the Lizardmen. Now, imagine if you gave such a terrifying creation not only 10,000 plus years to grow in defense and speed, but also it spent those millennia constantly fighting, constantly learning, and constantly adapting to deal with new threats. Combine all of these features and add in a sprinkle of some weapons of godlike power, and you have the next member on our list, Ancient Scar Leader Kroq-Gar. Kroq-Gar's life in a nutshell is virtually endless fighting since the inception of the Warhammer world. He was spawned in the now ruined city of Zodal, along with only a handful of other Saurus, which clearly marked all of them for greatness. These warriors all proved to be unsurpassed in battle cunning and easily dominated the beasts of the jungle, which is when Kroq-Gar selected his Carnosaur, Grimlock. But no mounts are allowed in this contest, so we'll leave him out of this discussion. The Chosen of Zodal was only a few centuries old when chaos came screaming into existence, bathing the world in an endless war of madness. Kroq-Gar fought without end against this new enemy, protecting his Slann and Temple City by slaughtering thousands upon thousands of demons on a daily basis. However, it was not enough, as the demons devised a way to teleport into the city itself, slaughtering the Slann before aid could arrive. Enraged, the Scar Leader led survivors in a mighty charge outside of the city, and they butchered all in their path. Kroq-Gar would continue fighting non-stop through the jungles of Lustria, striking down the enemies of the Old Ones with spear and claw for the next 400 years or so, until the elves finally banished the demons with the Great Vortex. Of the warriors of Zodal, proud Kroq-Gar was the only survivor. After the war, he was summoned to Hexadol by Lord Mazdamundi, and granted the position of leader of all of Lustria's armies. He was also granted the Hand of the Gods, which allows him to literally create small suns in his hand to obliterate his enemies at range. He would go on to win countless wars against every race that walks the Warhammer world. There is no continent that the ancient Scar Leader has not battled upon, crushing any and all who would deny the children of the Old Ones. This includes bringing every Savage Orc tribe on the continent of Lustria to heel by slaying all of their war bosses in duels, ending the invasion of the Chaos Lord Vashnar the Tormentor by beheading him in a duel, and being personally responsible for holding back the occasional demon army that erupts from the City of Echoes every once in a while. So what puts Kroq-Gar on our list? Well, first of all, he is the oldest warrior in the entire Warhammer world, besides one other who we'll see higher up. Not only does age make him extremely experienced in combat, it also means that he is supernaturally tough. During one of the final battles in Lustria, Kroq-Gar faced off against the Skaven Lord Skrolk of Clan Pestilence. The Ratman's plague weapon was so potent it felled the immense Carnosaur Kroq-Gar rode on in a single blow, rotting the poor creature's body away in seconds. To Kroq-Gar, however, this weapon proved to be more of an annoyance, so he promptly just grabbed it with the Hand of the Gods and crushed it, before spearing the vermin in the gut and killing him. On top of this, the Scar Leader also wields one of the most terrifying weapons in the world, the revered Spear of Tlanxla, who was the most warlike of the Old Ones. This spear was wielded by a being so powerful it could take on the gods of chaos themselves, and now it belongs to a mortal warrior who's quite potent in his own right. Should you be so much as scratched by this weapon, it forcefully overwhelms your mind with visions of doom and shatters the greatest resolve. It is also cleverly designed to shatter the magics binding both demons and undead into the world, making it quite potent no matter who the enemy may be. So, between launching explosions of light energy from his hand, wielding a god's own spear, and being the mightiest Saurus in the world, it's clear to see how Kroq-Gar makes our list in number 4. Why isn't he higher? Well, that's simple. We're not allowing mounts in this contest, and separating the Scar Leader from his trusty Carnosaur makes his feats a little more difficult to attribute to just him. So after taking off points for that, he lands well enough at number 4. As for the next warrior on the list, We've got the biggest and the baddest orc to ever stomp his way into the old world. Everyone knows that black orcs are dead hard, being a race engineered by the Chaos Dwarves to perfect the best traits of the orc, while doing away with their more idiotic tendencies. The one good thing that can be said about this experiment is that it was technically a resounding success, minus the part where the black orcs were made too strong and too smart, which resulted in a huge slave rebellion. After some typical backstabbery by Gobos, the Black Orcs were ousted from Tsar Nagrund into the Darklands. This wandering horde was so damn strong it caused the largest invasion of the old world ever seen, and only the legendary Sigmar Heldenhammer was able to turn it back. Despite this, the strongest Black Orc was yet to come. Grimgor Ironhide is an immense mammoth of an orc, almost having more in common with a troll when it comes to his sheer size and strength. On top of that, as his name would suggest, the mighty war boss is tougher than Gromrel nails, not to mention he's covered practically head to toe in extremely heavy iron armor that's been blessed by greenskin shamans to turn aside wandering blows. If that wasn't enough, his immense two-handed axe Gitsnik is enough to give even the drunkest giant pause about picking a fight with the boss. Although you may be skeptical at first about a big black orc making number 3 on this list, allow me to drive home just how absurdly strong Grimgor is. First, I shall turn to the eradication of Hellpit, which for any who may not be aware was once the second largest Skaven city, only falling behind the capital of Skavenblight. On top of having one of the largest armies in the entire world, Hellpit also functions as the headquarters for Clan Moulder, which is the Skaven clan responsible for creating horrific monsters and creatures for all manner of warfare. Abominations that can tear dragons apart, hordes of rat ogres augmented for various purposes, and even more nefarious creations like the deadly rat wolves can be found here. So keeping in mind all of this information, now realize that when Grimgor attacked the city, he literally picked a spot and kept killing everything sent at him while he stood there. Abominations? He killed them all. Rat ogres? He killed them all. Legions of storm vermin? He killed them all. The Skaven kept sending everything they had at him, before they finally began to squirt their fear musk at the realization that Grimgor was cutting his way through everything with ease. Finally, the impossible happened. The city of Hellpit ran out of things to attack with. The final defenders prepared themselves for an assault, terrified to face this being who defied all logic by slaying an uncountable amount of monstrous foes. However, rather than finish the city off, of course, Grimgor grew bored and hated the smell, so he decided to pack up and move on. The Black Orc would continue this pattern nearly everywhere he went, killing everything in sight until either there was nothing left to kill or he couldn't physically progress any further. When facing the entire militaristic realm of Kislev, who actively hold off chaos invasions, the Ice Queen had no choice but to spawn an endless blizzard that forced Grimgor to fall back. He just kept killing all of their armies and their greatest champions like they were children, so she had to use nature to beat him. The one thing he couldn't swing an axe at. The only foe to ever actually have bested Grimgor was Crom the Conqueror, who managed to hold the orc at a standstill until the Warriors of Chaos army routed the Greenskins, which forced the angry warboss to retreat, because although I'm sure he would have liked to have tried, he couldn't quite take on an entire Chaos army by himself. Though it should be noted, in the end times Grimgor was killed by Archaon, though this had more to do with surprise, as the warboss didn't expect the ever-chosen speed and strength to suddenly double to greater demon levels at the snap of a finger. In the end, Grimgor's feats are quite honestly hilarious. He's arm-wrestled a giant into submission, killed multiple greater demons and dragons, and headbutted one of the most powerful artifacts of chaos into oblivion. For that, we give the boss spot number 3. And now we move on to number 2, arguably one of the most famous warriors to ever grace the Warhammer world. He has journeyed across nearly every land, and has slaughtered every damn beast of note that exists. Greater demons, dragons, vampire lords, carnosaurs, wyverns, Pretty much everything you can think of has perished beneath his axe. Of course, we're talking about the worst slayer to ever live, Gotrek Gurnisson. Gotrek gets number 2 on the list for one simple reason. His list of feats is so absurdly long and ridiculous that it's just dumb. He survived being shot with a rifle at point-blank range off of a mountain onto extremely shallow water, to the point that when he hit the ground it was hard enough to cause notable cracks in the earth. Stone, I might add. That means he was moving at terminal velocity, and he was basically fine. He's been eaten, stabbed, immolated, blasted with horrific magic, crushed, and punched by so many titans, so many times, and yet each time the Dalwi continues to claim victory. He's survived the deadly Black Axe of Krell, which upon causing a wound, puts small black obsidian shards into the bloodstream that actively shred muscles and attempt to penetrate the host's heart. He had tons of these shards in his blood, and not only survived, but recovered quickly enough to return to the castle where Krell was at, and proceeded to bash the White to death with his axe until the champion of Kimler stopped moving. At the end of the day, Gotrek is on this list because he has roughly 20 entire books detailing his adventures and battles, each of which scales up in absurdity. The only reason he's not number 1 on this list is because thankfully we have one immensely powerful character who never happened to appear in one of Gotrek's books. Because if you show up in one of Gotrek's books, you're probably already dead. Be'lakor, he lost. An entire beast herd, they lost. A god, he lost. I think you get the point. The Axe of Grimnir made Gotrek into the living avatar of the warrior ancestor god himself, and he certainly wore the mantle well. That being said, let's move on in this list and return to Indie Pride to see who's number 1.
Number 1. Kholek Suneater, Herald of the Tempest. Alive before the elves had mastered the written word, before the first primordial greenskins had crawled out of their caves, perhaps even before the old ones had visited the world, the oldest Shoggoths walked the World's Edge Mountains. The first and largest of the ancient Shoggoths was Krakenrock the Black, the father of the Dragon Ogre race, and it was he that chose eternal damnation over a slow decline into extinction. But there was another, the second largest of his race, who would play a large part in this pact. Kholek was there, aeons ago, when the Dragon Ogre race made their dark pact with the Chaos Gods, and legend tells us that his part in the bargain was such an affront to nature, the sun would never shine upon him again. But unlike Krakenrock, Kholek Suneater would not sleep the millennia away. Every 8 generations of man, when the Chaos Moon Morslib waxes full in front of the true moon Manslib, a massive thunderstorm strikes the World's Edge Mountains. When the storm reaches its climax, Kholek awakens, and marches on the worlds of men. Where Kholek marches, raging lightning storms follow him, and such is his control of these storms that he can absorb the energy from the storm itself and redirect it, immolating his foes in a massive inferno. He's revered by many warriors of chaos as a mountain god, a force so powerful he could crush the strongest man-made fortifications with a single blow. Equipped with the gigantic hammer Star Crusher, a weapon forged in the raging heart of a volcano, Kholek has ended the lives of countless dragons and other horrifying beasts. At one point, during the Golden Age of Ulthuan, before chaos had blighted the northern steppes and began its corruption of the world, Kholek found himself in battle with a massive high elf host. He slaughtered thousands of them, and still he stood, the Azure unable to damage him through his thick brass armor. Finally, the elven archmages of Ulthuan realized they would be unable to end his terrible rampage by outright killing him, so they unleashed a spell of ice that would ultimately encase him for millennia. An entire elf army and their spellcasters could not kill Kholek Suneater or even damage him. Pretty insane. Another time he showed his power was during the Chaos invasion of Kislev, led by the ever-chosen of Chaos who would precede Archaon, the Chaos Lord Azavar Kul. During the siege of Prague, Kholek marched up to the walls and one-shot at them with Star Crusher, walls that had withstood countless Chaos sieges over the millennia. The Chaos host spilled into the city behind Kholek and slaughtered all of its inhabitants. Ultimately, Kholek Suneater is a force of nature, a creature so ancient and so powerful, he has more in common with the gods themselves than a monster of flesh and blood. Between his impervious hide, his thick armor, and a hammer so deadly it can end dragons in a single blow, it's easy to see why Kholek Suneater is number 1 on our list. And that concludes our top 5 countdown, the most vicious, the most powerful, the most skilled melee fighters in Warhammer Fantasy. But wait a minute, where's Archaon? The Anointed, the Ever-Chosen, the Lord of the End Times and the Harbinger of Destruction. Surely, Archaon should be number 1 on this list, or at the very least in the top 5. Well, the answer to that isn't so clear-cut. Remember those 2 rules we had at the beginning of the video about excluding mounts and manipulation of the winds of magic? Both of these directly affect Archaon in a big way. The Ever-Chosen is a level 2 wizard in the lores of Death, Fire, Metal, Shadow, and Tzeentch, capable of unleashing devastating spells in the lore, but more often than not using magic defensively and scything through opponents with his Demon Blade, the Slayer of Kings. Without access to the winds of magic, Archaon is certainly less powerful. That also goes the same for Dorgar, the Seed of the Apocalypse, a demon horse that he rides into battle that gives him a lot of power when he's going into melee combat. He's an incredibly strong duelist capable of taking on and defeating easily many great champions of the Warhammer world. But the 5 on our list are the best of the best, the strongest melee fighters in Warhammer. Take it with a grain of salt, because no one Black Library author is always 100% right about Warhammer lore, but Josh Reynolds, the author of Archaon, Lord of the End Times, said explicitly that Abhorash the Blood Dragon would defeat Archaon in a 1v1 duel. An author who wrote a book from Archaon's point of view. That says a lot, and if you remember, Abhorash is number 5 on our list. He could possibly even defeat Kholek Suneater, but again, that stuff is so open to interpretation, there's a lot of debate going on there. Remember that Archaon the Ever-Chosen is the supreme general and tactician of chaos, a man of unbreakable will and an insatiable desire to end the world. He is terrifying, beyond terrifying, but he is not the hordes of chaos' greatest fighter, not on his own. What separates Archaon from every other character in Warhammer is his sheer willpower, his indomitable spirit, a man whose will to destroy the world is so all-consuming he unites the fractured, ruinous powers into a cohesive fighting force, the likes of which the world has never seen and will never see again. Now keep in mind, this is our list. You are more than welcome to disagree with it. Most of these characters never fought each other in the lore, and obviously Warhammer and the Black Library have some contradictions between authors and the army books themselves, so getting 100% agreement is going to be close to impossible. Some of it frankly just comes down to opinion and will always be open for debate. But considering we have a lore master on board, lore master of Sotek, after some heavy discussion, we were both very confident with the top 5 melee fighters list we just presented to you guys. Now, we did mention a couple of magical abilities in our descriptions of the characters, but understand that we feel as though this list works whether they use those abilities or not. For example, Kroq-Gar with the Hand of the Gods or without it will put the hurt on 99.999% of the Warhammer cast. We're confident with him being in number 5 whether he has the Hand of the Gods or not. So, if there are any characters you think should have made it onto the list, feel free to let us know who you think those characters should have been and why. Just be sure to follow the same rules we did. Don't include mounts or lores of magic, and try to avoid end time stuff because we know that a lot of stuff got shuffled around during the end times with the incarnates of magic. It makes it very hard to figure out who was actually more powerful than who. Be sure to check out Lore Master of Sotek's channel. It will be in the description below. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. Indie Pride, Signing out for now.